The projector murmured softly as my presentation reached its peak. 12 international investors leaning forward in their seats, drawn in by the quarterly growth charts glowing on the screen. These weren't just strong numbers. They were groundbreaking for our field. I saw real curiosity in their eyes as I explained how our manufacturing process would reshape their market. As you can see from these metrics, I said, motioning toward the screen, we've managed to boost efficiency by 37% while also cutting material waste. This isn't hypothetical. These are real results from the pilot program I developed last year. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Normally, I would have ignored it during a presentation this important, but we were expecting confirmation on shipping logistics that these clients needed to hear. I excused myself slightly and glanced down. The message made my throat tighten. Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. Finish the meeting and clear your desk by 5 p.m. Dominic. My fingers went cold. The room swam briefly as I tried to comprehend what I was reading. 6 months of strange behavior from Dominic suddenly snapped into sharp focus. The way he'd begun cutting me out of strategy meetings, how he'd started asking increasingly detailed questions about my process documentation, the casual request to share my client contact information. I must have hesitated visibly because Irina, the lead investor, leaned forward, concern flickering in her eyes. Everything okay? My phone screen was still lit, the message plainly visible. I watched her gaze drop to it, then return to my face, her expression shifting from concern to something far more deliberate. Is there something we should know? She asked softly. The other investors were paying attention now, the energy in the room shifting from excitement to uncertainty in seconds. In that instant, something inside me, something that had been bending for months, finally broke clean. I placed my phone face up on the table. Actually, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, there is something you should know about this company. I turned back toward the projection screen where my carefully prepared presentation still showed our success metrics. These growth numbers are real. What isn't included in your information packets is that they came from my pilot program, one that uses sustainable materials from local suppliers, not the overseas manufacturers listed in your proposal. The investors exchanged quick looks. I brought up a new slide, one that hadn't been part of the official deck. These are the actual supply chain costs, I continued, indicating figures far lower than those in their packets. The difference has been systematically diverted elsewhere for the past year. The conference room door flew open. Dominic stood there, his face flushed crimson. There's been a terrible misunderstanding, but it was already too late. The investors had seen enough. If you're enjoying this story so far, I'd really appreciate your support. Hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories like this one and leave a comment about what you think is going to happen next. Trust me, this is only the beginning, and you won't want to miss what comes next. My name is Victoria, and until about 40 seconds ago, I was the innovation director at what many considered the most promising manufacturing startup in the Northeast. My friends call me Tori, though not many people get close enough to earn that privilege. I've always been careful with trust, a habit that served me well today. I graduated at the top of my class in chemical engineering and material science, and while my classmates chased roles at massive corporations, I deliberately targeted smaller companies where I could make a real impact. When Dominic recruited me 2 years ago, he promised exactly that: the freedom to transform our industry with sustainable practices. We're building something different here, he'd said during my interview, green eyes bright with what I believed was genuine passion. Most companies talk about sustainability as a marketing gimmick. I want it to be our foundation. Those words echoed everything I believed in, and I accepted his offer despite higher-paying opportunities elsewhere. The first year seemed to confirm I'd made the right decision. Dominic gave me resources, independence, and recognition as I developed our core manufacturing innovations. The problem started quietly, so quietly that for weeks, I wondered if I was imagining them. It began with Dominic asking me to add his name to my research reports. Just for internal documentation, he explained, since he was overseeing the department. Then came the executive meetings I was suddenly excluded from. Just budget discussions, he assured me. Nothing related to your work. I noticed changes to my presentation materials before client meetings, adjustments to cost projections, altered timelines. When I questioned them, Dominic would offer a tight smile, just making it more accessible for non-technical audiences. My project was renamed in company communications. My team members were reassigned one by one. My access to certain servers became temporarily unavailable due to security updates. After the third month of strange incidents, I began keeping records. Nothing dramatic, just a private document noting changes made to my work, conversations that felt off, decisions that didn't align with our supposed mission. 2 months ago, I overheard something that confirmed my fears. I was working late, the office nearly empty, when voices drifted from the conference room. Through the partially open door, I heard Dominic speaking with our finance director, Paula. "The board is impressed with your innovation strategy," Paula said. Dominic laughed softly. "They should be. The sustainability angle was exactly what we needed to set ourselves apart." And Victoria. Victoria is brilliant, but naive. She genuinely believes we're saving the planet while making money, perfect for developing the technology. But she doesn't understand the bigger picture, which is that we use her innovations to attract premium investment, then scale with traditional manufacturing once we've secured market position. The margins are incomparable, and when she realizes, by then, we'll have everything we need from her. Innovation directors are replaceable, especially ones who don't own their intellectual property. I slipped away before they noticed me, my thoughts racing. That night, I reviewed my employment contract with devastating clarity. The standard IP clause I'd barely noticed when signing suddenly revealed its true purpose. Anything I developed belonged to the company. But there was one thing Dominic didn't know, one critical detail he'd overlooked. During grad school, I'd specialized in intellectual property law alongside engineering, a rare combination shaped by watching my professor's solar technology stolen by a corporate partner. I learned then that contracts have limits, and timing is everything. I spent the following weeks preparing, documenting every alteration to my work, tracking the financial gaps between reported costs and actual expenses, and most importantly, researching the investors scheduled for today's presentation. Which brings us back to this moment. Dominic frozen in the doorway, his face twisted with panic, and 12 investors looking between us with growing concern. "Victoria," Dominic said, his voice tight with forced calm. "You're clearly upset about some organizational changes. Let's discuss this privately rather than confusing our guests with incomplete information." "Incomplete information," I repeated quietly. Interesting choice of words. I turned back to the investors. "What Mr. Dominic isn't telling you is that the manufacturing process you're investing in, the one that reduces costs while maintaining sustainability, exists solely because I developed it against company directive." "That's absurd," Dominic sputtered, stepping toward me. I raised my hand. "The difference between the actual production costs and what's listed in your packets represents approximately 12 million in missing funds, funds that have been consistently misreported in quarterly statements." The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The silent man in the corner, who hadn't introduced himself at the start of the meeting, finally spoke. "These are serious allegations, Miss Victoria," I supplied. "And they're not allegations, they're documented facts." "She's distraught," Dominic cut in. "We were planning to restructure her department, and clearly the news has come as a shock." The man in the corner rose slowly. "Actually, Dominic," I believe we should hear everything Victoria has to say. Dominic's face went pale. And who exactly are you? The man calmly produced a business card and set it on the table. Gregory Lambert, Securities and Exchange Commission, Enforcement Division. As Dominic stared in disbelief, Irina cleared her throat. And I represent the International Trade Commission. We've had your company on our watch list for some time. My pulse thundered as I watched Dominic's carefully constructed world begin to collapse. He lunged toward my laptop, but two investors stepped into his path. Don't worry, I said evenly. I've already shared the full presentation with everyone in this room. Dominic's face drained of color as he slowly realized this wasn't just a pitch meeting, but something far more deliberate. His confidence visibly unraveled as the weight of what was happening sank in, his career ending in real time. This is ridiculous, he stammered, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. Victoria has clearly misunderstood some internal communications. We were restructuring her department, not eliminating her role. Gregory from the SEC remained standing. Perhaps we should continue this discussion with your legal counsel present. Absolutely, Dominic replied too quickly. Let me reschedule this presentation for next week after we clear up this unfortunate misunderstanding. Irina shook her head. I think we've seen enough to warrant immediate attention. She turned toward me. Victoria, you mentioned discrepancies in the supply chain reporting. Can you explain further? I nodded and clicked to the next slide, one Dominic had never seen. This chart shows the actual material costs from our local suppliers compared to what's been reported to investors and the board. The room fell into an intense silence as the figures appeared. The green bars represent real costs documented through original invoices I preserved. The blue bars show what was reported in official financial statements. As you can see, there's a consistent 35% inflation across every category. Gregory pulled out a notebook. And where did the difference go? At first, I couldn't trace it, I admitted. But 3 weeks ago, I found something interesting. I clicked to another slide displaying a bank statement. This account was opened 6 months ago under the name of a shell company called Helios Manufacturing. The address matches a property Dominic purchased last year. This is outrageous, Dominic shouted, his composed facade completely shattered. You hacked private accounts. That's illegal. Actually, I replied calmly, I received this statement by accident. It was misdirected to my email instead of Paula's because our company addresses differ by a single letter. I simply opened an attachment sent to me. Gregory lifted an eyebrow toward Dominic. Is Paula your finance director? Dominic's silence answered for him. Victoria, Irina asked, when did you first suspect financial irregularities? I took a steady breath, aware that every word would be scrutinized in the investigation that followed. 4 months ago, I noticed discrepancies between my original budget proposals and the final versions presented to clients. When I raised concerns, I was told it was standard markup, which would be normal business practice. Dominic interrupted desperately. Except, I continued, the markup wasn't reported as profit. It was listed as production costs, artificially inflating expenses while creating an untraceable slush fund. The conference room door opened again. A security guard stepped in, visibly uneasy. Mr. Dominic asked me to escort Miss Victoria from the building, he said hesitantly. Gregory turned to him. I'm with the Securities and Exchange Commission conducting an inquiry. Miss Victoria will be staying. The guard's eyes widened. He nodded quickly and backed out. Dominic's breathing grew shallow and erratic. This is a setup. She planned this. Yes, I interrupted. I did plan this. Just like you planned to steal my work, take credit for my innovations, and discard me once you'd extracted everything valuable. I turned to the investors. 2 months ago, I discovered Dominic had filed patent applications for my technologies, listing himself as the primary inventor and me as a minor contributor. The filing dates were backdated to precede my employment. One of the investors, a silver-haired woman who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "I'm Eleanor with Brightline Capital. We were considering a significant investment in your company specifically because of these innovations." She turned slowly toward Dominic. "Were you aware that Victoria had already filed provisional patents 9 months ago as part of her graduate work?" Dominic's expression shifted from panic to confusion. "That's impossible. Our legal team verified." "Your legal team verified what you told them," I clarified. "The foundational work for these processes was documented in my thesis. I filed provisionals before joining the company. That's why I was comfortable signing your employment agreement. The core intellectual property was already protected." The room erupted in murmurs. Dominic lunged toward me, but two men intercepted him. "You think you've won?" he hissed, his charming facade completely gone. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. The board will never believe you over me." "They won't have to," Gregory stated flatly. "The evidence speaks for itself." As security escorted Dominic out, a strange hollowness replaced the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation. Years of work, countless late nights, all the passion I'd poured into these innovations, nearly stolen with a single text message. The meeting dissolved into controlled chaos as Gregory began collecting statements and contact information. Irina pulled me aside. "That took extraordinary courage," she said, "but this is only the beginning of a complicated process. Are you prepared for what comes next?" I nodded, though truthfully, I had no idea what awaited me. I couldn't let him take everything. "Whistleblowers often pay a steep price," she warned, especially when exposing someone as well-connected as Dominic. Her words sent a chill through me. Well-connected. I had thought he was simply ambitious. Irina's expression darkened. "Dominic didn't build this company alone. He has powerful partners who won't appreciate this public embarrassment." As the investors filed out, I gathered my materials, my thoughts racing. The victory I'd imagined suddenly felt incomplete, even dangerous. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every sound outside my apartment made me tense. Dominic's final words echoed in my mind. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I reviewed my options until dawn. By morning, I'd made a decision. I couldn't undo what I'd started, but I could prepare for what came next. I called my former graduate advisor, Professor Lin, who had warned me about Dominic when I first mentioned his offer. "You were right about him," I admitted. "I wish I hadn't been," she replied. "Where are you now?" "My apartment." "But I don't think I should stay here. Come to the university." "My office?" 1 hour. Professor Lin had spent 20 years in industry before academia. She'd seen brilliance stolen, credit erased, innovations buried to protect existing products. When I arrived, she was already making calls. "Victoria needs protection," she said into the phone. "Not just legal, actual protection." After a pause, she added, "Because Dominic Vega doesn't operate alone. He's the charming face for investors, but Archer pulls his strings." My blood ran cold. Archer, as in Hudson Archer. Hudson Archer was legendary, a pioneer who reshaped manufacturing in the 1990s before expanding into technology, energy, and private equity. His name was etched onto university buildings. His foundation funded research worldwide. Professor Lin ended the call and faced me. "You've stepped into something far bigger than a dishonest boss." Dominic was installed as CEO for his charisma and technical background. Archer Capital provides the money and connections that make everything possible. But why would someone like Hudson Archer need to steal my work? Because what you've developed threatens his existing investments. Your manufacturing process makes half his portfolio obsolete. It's more profitable to control your innovation than compete with it. I sank into a chair as the weight of it finally hit me. "What do I do now?" Professor Lin's expression softened. "What you've always done. Be smarter than they expect. Over the next week, I moved between temporary places, never staying anywhere longer than a night. News of the investigation surfaced in industry publications, though my name remained absent. Dominic was placed on administrative leave, pending internal review. Then the board called for an emergency meeting. Through my newly hired attorney, I agreed to meet at a neutral location. The temporary conference room felt sterile and tense as 5 board members entered. I recognized only 2, Paul Winters, the chairman, and Teresa Gale, head of the finance committee. Their faces were unreadable as they took their seats across from me and my attorney. Paul spoke first. "Miss Victoria, we want to thank you for bringing these issues to light. The board takes allegations of financial impropriety very seriously." I nodded but stayed silent. "However," he continued, "we're concerned about how this information was disclosed. Involving external parties in a sensitive internal matter has created significant complications." My attorney, Elena, responded before I could. "My client attempted to raise these concerns internally for months. She was consistently ignored and ultimately terminated for doing so." "There's no record of any formal complaints," Teresa countered. I opened my laptop. "I've brought copies of 17 emails sent to leadership over the past 6 months, each flagging discrepancies in financial reporting or raising concerns about intellectual property protection." "We never received these," Paul insisted. "Perhaps because Dominic maintained exclusive control over board communications," I said, "but I anticipated that possibility, which is why every email was blind copied to my personal account and time-stamped." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. "What exactly do you want, Victoria?" Teresa finally asked. "I want what I've always wanted, to see my work used to create sustainable manufacturing practices that benefit everyone, not just wealthy shareholders." Paul leaned forward. "Let me be direct. The company is prepared to offer you a generous settlement paired with a non-disclosure agreement. You'd be compensated for any inconvenience while allowing us to handle this discreetly." Elena smiled thinly. "My client has no interest in being silenced. The alternative could be unpleasant for everyone," Teresa warned. "Lengthy litigation drains resources and damages reputations, often for all parties involved." "Is that a threat?" I asked quietly. "It's reality," Paul replied. "We have significant resources and an obligation to protect the company's interests." I closed my laptop. "So do I." As we stood to leave, Paul made one final attempt. "Victoria, you should know Hudson Archer has taken a personal interest in resolving this situation. He suggested meeting with you directly." The mention of his name was meant to intimidate me. Instead, it confirmed everything Professor Lin had warned me about. Hudson Archer wouldn't involve himself in a minor dispute unless he had real skin in the game. "I'll consider it," I replied evenly. Outside the building, Elena gripped my arm. "Be careful meeting Archer. Men like him don't reach that level of power by playing fair." "I know," I told her, "but sometimes you have to step closer to danger before you can neutralize it." That evening, my phone rang from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A smooth, measured voice spoke. "Miss Victoria, Hudson Archer here. I believe we should talk." My pulse quickened. This was the man who controlled billion-dollar industries, whose name appeared on buildings and headlines alike, now calling me directly. "I appreciate you reaching out," I said carefully, "though I'm surprised the chairman of Archer Capital gets involved in operational disputes at portfolio companies." A low chuckle came through the line. "When something threatens multiple investments at once, I make exceptions." His tone was casual, as if we were discussing the weather rather than my future. "Would you be willing to meet tomorrow?" "My private office downtown." Every instinct screamed danger, yet refusing wasn't an option if I wanted to understand what I was truly facing. "I'll be there," I agreed, with my attorney. "That won't be necessary," Archer replied smoothly. Just a friendly conversation between colleagues. Nevertheless, she'll be joining me. A brief pause. As you wish. 3 tomorrow. My assistant will text you the address. After the call ended, I immediately rang Elena and Professor Lin, putting them on a conference call to plan. He's trying to intimidate you, Elena warned. Men like Archer believe their reputation alone will make you fold. Professor Lin was blunter. He'll offer you everything. You think you want? Then take twice as much in return. What choice do I have? I asked. If I refuse, he'll find other ways to apply pressure. You always have choices, Victoria, Professor Lin said, but you need leverage, something he values more than silencing you. I stared out at the city lights, thinking about what Hudson Archer valued most, his reputation, his empire. Then it struck me. His legacy. I whispered it aloud. Hudson Archer is 73 years old. He's spent decades giving commencement speeches about innovation and progress. What if the final chapter of his story is stealing ideas and crushing real innovation just to protect outdated investments? Elena understood instantly. Public perception. That's the one thing someone like him can't buy outright. Exactly, I said as my thoughts snapped into focus. And I knew how to approach the meeting. I spent the night researching Hudson Archer, his companies, his public statements, his philanthropy. By morning, I had a sharper sense of who he was and what might sway him. The address his assistant sent led to an understated building in the financial district, no company name on the entrance, just a simple A etched into glass doors. Security checked my ID and escorted us to a private elevator, handing over a key card. Elena squeezed my arm as we rose. Remember, we walk if anything feels off. Your safety matters more than the outcome. The doors opened to a minimalist reception area with sweeping city views. A composed woman greeted us. Miss Victoria, Miss Elena, Mr. Archer is expecting you. She led us into a spacious office where Hudson Archer stood to greet us. In person, he carried more authority than his photos suggested. Tall, lean, piercing gray eyes, a simple charcoal suit that likely cost more than my yearly salary. Victoria, he said, offering his hand like we were old acquaintances. Thank you for coming. I shook it firmly. Mr. Archer. Hudson, please. He gestured toward seats by the windows. Coffee? Water? We declined. The hospitality felt calculated, a subtle power move. I've followed your career with interest, he said once seated. Your graduate work showed remarkable promise. I raised an eyebrow. My graduate work hardly seemed visible to someone like you. A faint smile. I fund sustainable manufacturing research at 17 universities. Promising innovations don't escape my attention. He leaned forward. Which is why Dominic's behavior is particularly disappointing. I knew nothing of his financial misconduct. Yet you're intervening now, Elena noted. Archer nodded. Because Victoria's work is too valuable to lose to lawsuits and headlines. What Dominic attempted was wrong. Full stop. The admission caught me off guard. So what do you propose? I asked. A clean slate. I'll ensure you receive full credit. Leadership will be restructured. Your patents remain yours, with an exclusive licensing agreement that compensates you fairly. He named a number that made me pause. You'll also have complete autonomy over the sustainable manufacturing division. It was everything I should have wanted. Recognition, control, resources. And in return? I asked. Discretion regarding the investigation. We resolve this internally without further regulatory involvement. Elena shifted. You're asking her to potentially obstruct a federal inquiry? Archer shook his head. I'm asking her to state her concerns have been addressed. Agencies can redirect their limited resources. I studied him. Why does this matter to you personally? This is more than protecting a portfolio company. For the first time, a crack showed. Something like fear flickered. Your process isn't just innovative, Victoria. It's revolutionary. It renders traditional methods obsolete almost overnight. He gestured at the skyline. I have investments in 14 manufacturers that would collapse if this spreads too fast. So it's about protecting your assets, I said. Controlled transition, he corrected. Sudden disruption destroys jobs, communities. I'm proposing managed change. It sounded reasonable, until I recalled my research. An interesting stance from someone who built his fortune by dismantling the steel industry in the 90s, closing 3 major firms in 18 months. His expression tightened. I've learned from mistakes. Or you're shielding yourself now that you're on the other side, I countered. The air cooled. Archer leaned back, reassessing me. What do you want, Victoria? Beyond my offer. Transparency, I said, without hesitation. No shell companies, no hidden ownership, full disclosure to investors about how my technology works and what it means for existing manufacturing. He considered it. That would force market corrections. Yes, it would. I'd need time to reposition certain holdings first, Elena cut in. That sounds like insider trading. Archer smiled thinly. I'm simply being practical. So am I said, reaching into my bag. I pulled out a slim folder and placed it on the table. Inside was evidence that Archer Capital had actively suppressed similar innovations from at least 3 other researchers over the past decade. Each case followed the same pattern: promising technology acquired through a subsidiary, then mysteriously shelved or restricted through exclusive patents. His face remained calm, but his fingers tightened slightly on the armrest. Where did you get this information? Professor Lin has tracked buried innovations for years. After Dominic's actions raised red flags, she connected the dots. For several long moments, Archer said nothing. Then, surprisingly, he smiled, a genuine expression that softened his severe features. Claudia Lin. I should have known she'd be involved. He shook his head. We were research partners 40 years ago before taking different paths. Different ethics, you mean? I corrected. Different perspectives on progress, he said. Claudia believes in radical transparency regardless of consequences. I believe in measured transitions. He tapped the folder. This information could damage more than just me, Victoria. Thousands of jobs depend on stable markets. I'm not looking to create chaos, I assured him. Just to ensure my work isn't buried like theirs. The negotiation lasted nearly 3 hours. Elena proved invaluable, catching subtle loopholes in Archer's proposed terms. By the time we reached a tentative agreement, the sun was setting over the city. Archer extended his hand again. I underestimated you, Victoria. That won't happen again. I certainly hope not, I replied, shaking firmly. As Elena and I rode the elevator down, she whispered, Did we just negotiate with the devil? We negotiated with a businessman who forgot that innovation can't be controlled forever, I said. And we got what we needed. The following weeks passed in a blur of legal documents, restructuring announcements, and carefully worded press releases. Dominic resigned to pursue other opportunities. The board appointed an interim CEO with a strong ethical reputation. Most importantly, my patents remained mine, with a licensing agreement maintaining my control over implementation. What no one except Elena and Professor Lin knew was that our agreement with Archer contained a hidden safeguard. If my technology was restricted or its rollout delayed beyond specific benchmarks, a trust would automatically release all of Professor Lin's research on buried innovations to select journalists and regulatory agencies. 6 months later, I stood on a manufacturing floor, watching workers implement my process at full scale. A news crew filmed a feature on sustainable industrial innovations. The reporter turned to me. Your technology is being called revolutionary. Did you expect this level of impact when you developed it? I smiled, thinking of the path that led here. I always believed in its potential. I'm just grateful it found the right home for proper implementation. What I didn't say was that the right home emerged only after Hudson Archer reorganized his holdings, divesting from companies that couldn't adapt and investing heavily in those that could. The market adjustment was gradual enough to avoid chaos, yet decisive enough to create real change. That text message, the one that had shattered my world in the conference room, ultimately forced a reckoning that made my innovation stronger. Dominic had tried to eliminate me, unaware that by pushing me to the edge, he had ensured his own downfall. That evening, an unexpected email arrived from Hudson Archer. Victoria, watched your interview today. The Western plant exceeded efficiency projections by 23%. You were right about the implementation timeline. Sometimes old dogs can learn new approaches. If you're interested in discussing the next phase, my door remains open. Ha! I smiled as I typed my reply. Glad to hear about the Western plant. Happy to discuss next steps. This time, I'll bring the coffee. Victoria. My revenge wasn't destroying careers or companies. It was ensuring that innovation couldn't be buried, that truth couldn't be silenced with a single text. By standing my ground against both Dominic and Hudson Archer, I had not only protected my work, but potentially changed how an entire industry approached progress. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't tearing someone down, it's building something so valuable they have no choice but to acknowledge your worth. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more authentic stories of resilience and determination. Have you ever stood your ground when someone tried to claim your work? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else facing similar challenges. Remember, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is refuse to be silenced.